The president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, personally worked to ensure that Stephen Vitkov became Donald Trump's chief envoy in negotiations about the war in Ukraine, and also secretly met with Vitkov one-on-one. And even before Trump's friend became responsible for negotiations on Ukraine, the Wall Street Journal presents this shocking information in its article, which provides facts about how the Kremlin influenced Stephen Vitkov and how it pushed him towards certain decisions. But in reality, this is just the beginning. There is even more shocking information. It turned out that even before Vitkov's first trip to Moscow, the Kremlin set conditions for his meeting with Putin. Putin gave an order to his envoy Kirill Dmitriev to pass through Saudi Arabia that Donald Trump should send Stephen Vitkov to Moscow and no one else. Moreover, the Kremlin's condition was as follows. Vitkov had to come to Moscow alone, without any CIA staff, diplomats, or even his personal interpreter. Since then, Stephen Vitkov has openly served the Kremlin's interests. What did Vitkov hear in his private meeting with Putin in Moscow? Was it one-on-one? Let's explore this together in this episode. I'm Alexei Pichi, and we'll take a closer look at this topic. But before we start this episode, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, write any detailed comment under this episode, and friends, also subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pichi News. The link to it is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in. So, the president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, managed to arrange a one-on-one meeting with Stephen Vitkov before Vitkov was appointed as the United States President's special representative for Ukraine. He also encouraged him to lead the delegation for negotiations with Russia. The American newspaper Wall Street Journal writes about this in an article about Russia's influence on the negotiator from the United States of America. According to the newspaper, Russian intelligence compiled dossiers on officials from Donald Trump's inner circle after the Republican won the United States presidential election in 2024. The Kremlin was looking for a convenient person in the Trump administration who would help lobby the Russian Federation's demands to Ukraine. That is why Moscow was strongly opposed to Kellogg, who was initially appointed as Trump's special representative for Ukraine. The intelligence of the Russian Federation noted that his daughter headed a charitable organization in Ukraine, and the Kremlin saw this as an obstacle. We all recall how in the spring Putin insisted Trump remove General Kellogg from negotiations, calling him inconvenient, and Trump complied with the Kremlin's demand. Stephen Vitkov, as the Wall Street Journal writes, attracted the Kremlin's attention because he has more experience in business than in politics. He doesn't always coordinate his actions and trips with American intelligence agencies as regulations usually require. They say he's just a businessman and he's less involved, so it will be easier to manipulate him, especially since Kirill Dmitriev found common ground with him specifically on the topic of trade, and since then Vitkov has been promoting the restoration of trade relations with Russia and talking about some mythical joint projects worth billions and billions of dollars. And as the Wall Street Journal writes, it was possible to establish contact through a similar person from the world of finance. Putin's aide Kirill Dmitriev, who headed the Russian Direct Investment Fund. And unfortunately, they succeeded. Next, I'll quote the Wall Street Journal. Stephen Vitkov received an intriguing message from the Russian Federation just a few days after he was appointed as Trump's special representative for the Middle East. Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman delivered Dmitriev's message to the American. Putin's aide contacted him before Russia's full invasion of Ukraine, as Russia began sending finances to the Middle East after annexing Crimea. The message to Vitkov proposed, and so, a closed, unannounced meeting between Putin and Vitkov actually took place back on February 11th, 2025. And here I will immediately note that officially publicly, it was long believed that United States Special Envoy Stephen Vitkov first met Russian President Vladimir Putin in person in Moscow on April 11th, 2025. But in reality, this happened 2 months before that. The content of the first conversation is unknown, but as a result, 63-year-old American Mark Fogan, who had been convicted in Russia on drug smuggling charges, was released from a Russian prison. Let me remind you that Fogel had been in custody since August 2021. The reason was that medical cannabis was found on him when he crossed the Russian border, which had been prescribed to Fogel by a doctor to relieve chronic pain. And now, the Wall Street Journal believes that Fogel's sudden release, and by the way, even the convicted man's lawyer was not notified, was a kind of gesture from Vladimir Putin showing that he prefers to negotiate specifically with Vitkov. As if to say, look, with Witkoff, I'm willing to release Americans, but if you push Kellogg on me, there won't be negotiations. Right after that, the American president really did bring Stephen Vitkov in to work on finding a way to end Russia's war against Ukraine. And Kellogg was removed from central roles in this process, and here, as they say, it's simple math. Stephen Vitkov visited Putin more times in 1 year than any American official had in the previous 75 years. No one from the United States has visited Putin this frequently before. In early December, Stephen Vitkov made his 6th official trip to Russia, having another long, closed-door conversation with Putin. According to the Wall Street Journal, no White House official has ever had such frequent personal access to a Russian or Soviet leader since the United States formed an alliance with Joseph Stalin under the Lend-Lease Act during World War II. Stephen Vitkov, appointed as Trump's special representative, hasn't visited Ukraine once, unlike Kit Kellogg, and all of this is partly the result of maneuvers by Vladimir Putin aimed at pushing American diplomats out of discussions on United States-Russian relations and relying on the support of American billionaires. The Kremlin's strategy here is very simple. They hope to bribe greedy businessmen from Trump's team with promises of some super deals worth hundreds or even thousands of billions of dollars. At the same time, Donald Trump does not hide his skepticism about traditional political regulations and institutions. Such an approach by the Kremlin does not cause rejection, although some advisors to the United States president oppose it. Listen. There are diplomats for negotiations, people who have dedicated their lives to this, studied, got an education, and you're just sending a businessman. Well, that's kind of illogical. But that's not all. The newspaper reported that Putin studied the psychological profiles of officials in Trump's inner circle and Trump's Ukraine representative in the United States, Kellogg. In the reports of the Russian special services prepared for Putin, it was emphasized that Kellogg's daughter was engaged in charitable activities in Ukraine. This was an alarming signal and indicated that he might be hostile toward Russia's demands during the upcoming peace negotiations. Kellogg also disregarded television host Tucker Carlson's alleged claim that Moscow was ready to negotiate according to his information. As we know, Kit Kellogg is leaving his position, and Stephen Vitkov and Kirill Dmitriev are developing a new economic and political order for all of Europe. Listen, just imagine Putin and a representative of Trump developing an economic and political order for Europe. And this was a shock for many. What we saw in Donald Trump's national security strategy, where he explicitly says that it's time for Americans to come to Europe and bring order there. And also that the United States can forcibly make Europeans be friends with Russians. Negotiations between Stephen Vitkov and Kirill Dmitriev may have dictated it. As a result, the previous bilateral control mechanisms no longer work. Since June, the United States doesn't have an ambassador. In Moscow, the role of ambassador, diplomat, and everything else is replaced. Stephen Vitkov and James O'Brien are no longer Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs. There is no such person anymore. Vitkov declined several offers from the Central Intelligence Agency to hold a briefing on Russia, stating, listen, it's his personal business where he flies and what he negotiates with the Russians about. Since he, I emphasize, is not an official staff member of the White House or any department. And although the United States State Department allocated a small group of staff to support the special envoy of the United States president. But members of this team, like other administration staff, have a hard time getting reports about Vitkov's overseas meetings. He keeps saying he's a private individual. Sure, he's an assistant to Trump, but he's not a White House employee. What do you expect? He doesn't have to report to you. So you could say that, unfortunately, Putin managed to get, as they say, his own man into Trump's team. Friends, I'll leave it at that for now. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you get notifications about new episodes. Friends, if you found this episode interesting or useful, you can support our work with your donation or a paid sponsorship subscription using the links and details provided. In the description of this video, it says, support the channel Alexei Pechi. Choose any support format that is convenient for you. I will be grateful for any of your donations. That's all. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.